Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Hungary is again at odds with Brussels. Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó has said Budapest, quote, will not tolerate external pressure, close quotes, to end its reliance on Russian energy, even as the EU moves to ban all Russian oil and gas imports by 2028. Meanwhile, Hungary's economy faces headwinds. Industrial output is falling. American investors are pulling out of major projects, and inflation remains stubbornly high. Joining me is Tomasz Kasprowicz. He's editor-in-chief of Respublika Nova. Mr. Kasprowicz, welcome to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Have a good day.
So why is Hungary being so stubborn? Is it economic, or do they just want to defy the EU?
Well, there are several issues here. Firstly, they are dependent on the Russian energy, and cheap Russian energy at that. Taking into consideration their current problems, economic problems, increased cost of energy would be another blow and another contributing factor to the increasing inflation, something that Orbán doesn't want to see due to the incoming elections. So this is the current issue, so to speak, with Hungary's resistance. But also, let's not forget that Hungary is somewhat friendly toward Russia, currently together with Slovakia. They are not let's say, so that now they are thinking about how to postpone all of the sanctions or other means the EU is aiming at Russia, and hoping for even better prices on the energy that is supposed to help the Hungarian economy.
Well, okay, let's take each of those in turn. Let's start with the first one first. And you say, well, you know, Hungary really can't afford to buy more expensive energy than they're getting now because it's going to have an economic impact on the country. But they haven't, I mean, you know, other countries in the EU have managed to wean themselves off Russian energy. And they started in 2022. Hungary didn't. Even when it wasn't facing these internal economic issues. Surely it's not just about inflation, is it? It's simply a lack of will to do anything about it.
Well, this comes from Orbán's analysis of the situation. He thought, along with Putin, that the war will be somewhat short, and that by buying cheap energy from Russia, he will be able to build competitive advantages for Hungary. This did not materialize because the energy from Russia is not that cheap anymore anyways, and the energy prices are slightly lower in Hungary, but not that much lower. But that was his gamble, and he hoped to achieve something with that. Of course, the Hungarian economy is facing many structural issues that we can discuss in a moment, but not taking those expenses at the time when everybody did, and hoping for better outcomes and being popular in Hungary didn't really play out. But here now, Hungary is even in bigger problems than then, and now cutting off from the energy just before the elections is basically a political suicide from Orbán. So I'm not saying he's doing something right. I'm just saying this is his political calculation and his hope to remain at power.
Understood. Now, you mentioned the upcoming election. What do you think his chances are as things currently stand, and assuming he continues buying from Russia?
Well, his chances of winning the elections are not very high. He's in a quite precarious situation right now. Of course, over the years, he built a lot of obstacles to any opposition party taking over the power to actually get rid of him and his cronies. But still losing power is very, very likely. And he is, of course, coming up with many political campaigns. For example, he said he will be coming to every village in Hungary with consultations about not getting Hungary into war, because that's one of his main points, that he is guaranteeing that Hungary will not be part of the war. This did work well for him in the past, but not so much anymore. Still, is one of last Hail Marys that maybe he'll be able to solidify his support coming on. So far it seems he might be losing those elections. A lot of is showing that. But he's not putting up the fight. Definitely, he's not willing to shoot himself in the knee by increasing inflation even higher just before the elections.
Understood. Now, if he does lose the elections, as you suspect he might, his likely successor, Peter Magyar, he's saying that Hungary could move away from Russian fuels by 2035, but not overnight. What do you think's behind that sentiment?
Well, definitely the same sentiment as is helping Orbán, or was helping Orbán for some time. Let's not forget that Orbán is at power for so many years, not without the reason. So Magyar cannot be very radically opposed to Russia, as this would be quite unpopular. It could cost him several percentage points in support. So what he's saying is he's signaling that he is willing to change Hungary's stance, and that will most likely happen when he wins. But he doesn't want to seem very radical. And let's not forget, Hungary cannot get away from Russian energy overnight, mostly because of all of the things that Orbán did. Because over the years, Orbán deepened the dependency of Hungary on Russian oil. So undoing it is not a project for one night. It could be probably done quicker than till 2035, but definitely not within a couple of months.
All right, now zooming out a little bit, the European Union wants to impose sanctions and stop the whole of the bloc from buying Russian energy. Is there a workaround? Because we know that Hungary and Slovakia are going to try and stop that motion. Is there a workaround that the EU could use so that they could go ahead with those sanctions without the approval of Hungary and Slovakia?
Well, there are possibly two ways that can be done. One that was used so far, which means basically that there is a move with some exemptions. Yeah, the sanction just after the war started was basically implemented in such a way that certain countries were given certain time frame, or there were certain provisions that were alleviating problems of those countries and made them agree. Let's not forget that even Orbán, that was heavily pro-Russian, didn't stop the sanctions outright, which he could, because of a high pressure and some concession he got from European Union for doing that. Still, let's not forget, he did block several sanctions, for example, against Kirill, the chief of Moscow Orthodox Church. So that's one way. The second way is, of course, something that EU wants to avoid as a bad example, but this is the coalition of the willing, meaning basically everybody except Slovakia and Hungary is implementing the sanction, and hoping that over time the pressure or change at power in those countries will actually lead to common stance. Let's not forget that the EU is quite a big organism, and it's harder and harder to coordinate with unanimous decisions.
What happens if countries do not follow the EU plan? 2028 is the deadline. What happens if Hungary or Slovakia have not fallen in line, which is likely? Are there any sanctions that the EU can impose on those two countries which are actually going to make their economic situation even worse than it currently is?
Well, that's different from Slovakia and Hungary. Of course, we cannot use word sanctions, but let's not forget that EU has a lot of tools of economic pressure, and a lot of those tools are already used against Hungary for the rule of law problems this country has. So there is definitely a pressure, starting with withdrawing the funds, but possibly others as well, that can be used in order to soften the position of those countries. I said it's different for Slovakia and for Hungary, because Hungary was basically already subject to most of those tools. And what we can expect if the government changes in Hungary is actually easing those sanctions. Probably at the same time, Hungary will be moving towards this plan. But the full set of those tools can be used to convince Slovakia to move forward, especially if they are left alone with Hungary moving towards the EU stance. That's let's not forget that Slovakia is a much smaller country, and much less pressure is needed to make it fall in line.
Right, well, we shall see how all those moving pieces fit together. Mr. Kasprowicz, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your analysis. Have a good evening.
Goodbye.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.